Hey, it's been a while. Since the last update, I spent a lot of time trying to discover my game and make it actually fun. Let me elaborate. As I mentioned in the last episode, I decided to send builds of my game to my friends, iterating on the received feedback in between. And honestly, I'm quite happy that I did it this way, as by doing so I maximized the fresh looks and reduced pre-existing bias for various improvements. The first big issue that was flagged was the item cooldowns. My original reason for adding these cooldowns that activate when any item or ability is used was to give player a reason to have multiples of the same thing. For example, having 2 dashes would allow player to move around more quickly as the player could alternate between them. The key issue is that this doesn't reward the player for good play as much as it punishes for bad one. When I, the creator of the game with knowledge of all the weapons, how they work and how they move, play, I can battle without any hindrances. But if a fresh new player, who for example has no idea how far a certain sword reaches, tries out my game, they will spend most of the time waiting for a cooldown to finish so that they can try again. And the problem isn't with the higher skill floor, there are plenty of popular games that have it. The issue is that the skill check happens on a basic interaction between the player and the game, and I would have not realized it had my friends not commented on their experiences and the cooldowns being too punishing. So, ability cooldowns had to go. Instead, I opted in for something closer to Dark Souls, the stamina bar. Players can try and retry the same attack multiple times without any issue. However, they can't rely on spamming the attacks as the stamina could run out, exposing them to danger. The combat speed was also updated through several iterations, starting with the player movement was being locked up during the attack animations. Most weapon attack animations are split into 3 parts. Pre-attack, which shows item being drawn and prepared for the attack, then the main attack animation, during which the player could deal damage, and then finally the recovery animation, which would show the item going back into its starting position. Initially, the locking of player inputs happened with the pre-animation start and would last until the recovery animation finished. This was meant to make the player be more strategic with their actions, as starting an attack meant player will have to commit to it, similarly to Dark Souls. However, a fair few people pointed out that these locks were quite brutal, and after doing a more thorough comparison with Dark Souls 3, I realized that yeah, my game was way more unforgiving, as Dark Souls would allow the player to do a whole 180-degree turn during the pre-attack animation and fully unlock the player during the recovery animations. So I decided to do that, while also allowing the player to cancel out from the pre-attacks, though that was made almost pointless by my next update, which was the weapon speeds. When deciding how long every animation should be, I again tried to follow Dark Souls' example. However, I didn't account for Dark Souls being also a multiplayer game, meaning that player attacks need to have a longer wind-up animation so that the player opponents could have time to react to them. My game pre-attack animations were long as an attempt to introduce risk to the item use, which also hindered attacks against certain fast-moving NPCs. Furthermore, when I was balancing most of the weapons, I treated them as a supplementary to the starting weapon, which resulted in them being highly situational and not that powerful. Combined with the fact that there are no cooldowns anymore, these weapons became kind of pointless, so I rebalanced them to feel more like an option for a primary weapon. I made their animation snappier and their damage output higher, while also keeping the mechanics so it can still shine in certain situations, and feel like an upgrade or an extension to the starting weapon. Had I not heard about the expectation for these weapons to be used everywhere, or the starting weapon being too good to exchange it for something else, I doubt I would have done this necessary rebalancing now, and caused a lot of frustration to random players who would lose interest in the game when the demo becomes public. Since the last update, I also created rooms with swinging axes. Some of them had their bases stationary and some would move on a predetermined path. Based on the feedback I received and what I saw, the issue was that the people would quite often get caught off guard, especially by the axes with the moving bases. At the first iteration, I added some blood textures and marked every room at the entrance. But that didn't help, so I added the ground scratch textures. No dice. I even tried to add even more blood sprites, trying to bring attention to the zones where the axes would swing or move. but still, people get surprised and feel unfairly punished. I ended up eliminating all the axes with moving platforms and also simplified some of the fixed base axes that were on a very long stick that would swing at a wide angle, preferring shorter and slower axes that would be easy to see without being too late. I think the main issue was that I didn't really teach the bloody floor and the axe hazard association to the player. If I had a sequence in a tutorial where a zombie gets killed and splats blood on the floor, maybe that would have helped, but in the end I chose the safer route. I'd say overall I managed to take the feedback pretty well and not take it too personally, even though I've been working on the game full time for quite a while. But I cannot lie, it did sow some self-doubt, especially when I got feedback that once I heard it, it was so obvious and I couldn't understand how did I not see that before. It got me doubting whether I should be even designing games, or if the vision that I have is the one I should be even pursuing. While the former, hopefully, is just a skill issue that I should overcome if I continue making games, the doubts about my vision have been there for quite a while, as they started with moving away from the time-sensitive runs to a more objective-based runs, where the player has to break 3 seals, which keeps me reconsidering my decisions to this day. And recently I came to an understanding that a vision is more about the emotions I want the player to experience, which due to its abstract nature cannot really be right or wrong, but my method to invoke these emotions definitely can. Which circles back to it being a skill issue on my part, and I just hope that I can get better. My friends weren't the only people who managed to play my game. I managed to participate in a local game event called Game On. When I first learned about being able to submit my indie game for a showcase, it was already past the deadline, but for some reason I checked again a few days later, and it appeared that the deadline was pushed further, so I spent a whole weekend working on the game and then submitted it. After a few email exchanges, which was me basically asking a bunch of questions since I haven't participated in a game event like this before, I finally fully agreed. And then I was told I had a half a day to prepare 2 big posters that will be printed for my booth. Whoops. It was a bit stressful since there were a few requirements and my tools weren't the greatest, but I still managed to create them, and this is how it looked like. I've written about my experience in a blog post more aimed at the other game developers, but if you're curious, I'll link it in the description down below. Over the 3 days I had fun, and importantly I got a ton of feedback from the attendees, which included both game developers and gamers. It also was quite fascinating to see my game being played by 9S, Harrier Dubois and Wario. I also noted quite a few things like previously mentioned issues, with players keeping the starter weapon, always being surprised by the swinging axis, or having troubles with the UI. I also received a great suggestion to separate the entrances of the rooms with walls that then get broken down by the boss when it passes through them, rather than having just empty corridors like it is now. And while I would like to have this in, I don't feel fully confident that this is the best use of my time, as I am not sure how the next 4 levels will look like and if I can repurpose this feature in them. But I will keep this idea in my mind until then. Also, people were really excited when they saw enemies damaging each other, so I think I will add more of this in the future as well. Overall, I noticed that my game wasn't everyone's cup of tea, which is fine, but I also saw people that enjoy my game, and that was definitely a morale booster. Oh, and before I forget, during this time I put a lot of new features, new items and rooms, but I won't cover them here. Instead, how about you tell me your impressions on the new Discord server after downloading and playing the new public demo, which is out now on itch.io. I hope you enjoy it. See you next time. Bye bye!